What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Kuhn here, host, back with another episode. We are down at Prairie Surf Studios today. Shout out to Matt and Nadir for hosting us. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our guest, Sandino Thompson, who is a community developer and partner at Echo. Mate, thanks for coming down.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, looks like you've done a lot of these. So you're comfortable talking in front of a microphone, which is always a pleasure to sit across the table from, because I don't have to work so hard, and you like to talk from what I can gather, which is great. So I'm just going to set you off, and you can tell stories. But yeah, appreciate you coming down, just from kind of chatting to you for a little bit. Love what you're doing, and obviously you have a passion for this city, and we're going to get into that today. But before we do, tell me your story, mate. Were you born and raised here?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Oklahoma City. My parents, my family's been in Oklahoma since before it was a state. So we got deep roots here. Both my parents came, sort of grew up in Oklahoma City as well. And I grew up in on the east side, but it's actually there's two east sides to Oklahoma City. There's the city part of kind of the black community, and then there's the country part of the black community. So I grew up in the country part. We actually, a lot of the black community, but, around a lot of black cowboys. Folks still to this day, we ride horses on the streets and things like that. But had grandparents who were in sort of the east side over by the Capitol and those kind of things. So I just kind of grew up bouncing around between further east Oklahoma City and in the kind of city part of Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Do you know Jakian from Jakayan from? I always get his name wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jakayan. It is Jakayan, right?
So I do. Yeah. He
was on a couple of months ago.
Yeah. So I love what those guys are doing, because growing up, especially being from the country, but also that part of Oklahoma City's got the first housing project that ever got built. In fact, it's one of the first places I lived. I don't even remember it, but I've heard about it in a place called Dungy Park. And so I grew up with that culture, but you didn't know what was cool and what to appreciate. It's just what you knew, right? Mm-hmm. And so I grew up around a bunch of cowboys, a bunch of country boys and gals. And so it's been interesting to watch that culture sort of resurface, something I've always known. So yes, I do know him and the work they're doing with the black cowboys and with the black rodeos. We can talk a whole bunch about that some other time, but it's there's a whole world where I absolutely think that husbandry, what people don't realize, it's cowboy and Indian, right, that whole juxtaposition and context. Well, most cowboys were Mexican, indigenous, or black. So you think cowboys, you think John Wayne and all that kind of stuff. And we grew up knowing that's a part of it. The folks doing the work, the cowboy culture, the Bill Pickett's and the Nat Turners and all that kind of stuff. Or sorry, the Deadwood Dicks, those guys, they actually pioneered that culture. That's the culture I grew up around. So I love seeing what those guys are doing to make it more contemporary and modern.
Yeah, it's impressive. And when they came on, talked about going to Paris Fashion Show, right, and doing the Louis Vuitton collab. Back to what we're going to talk about today of putting Oklahoma City on the map. It helps regardless of what area it's in. It puts us out there, and it was amazing to see, and the story's incredible. So grew up around kind of the black rodeo scene on the east side. Do you have any cattle or horses at the moment?
I don't. I had horses growing up, and this is actually kind of it's interesting. So I also grew up. My mom was the first person in her family to go to college. So not a surprising story. That's not necessarily a black story, but just in Oklahoma, we're a new state. But so she was the first person to go to college, and she kind of had a hippie phase. So I grew up and she grew up very rural. So they raised what they ate. And so she grew up with her brother. She was the only girl, kind of basically explain the story of slaughtering her pets. And so she'd be friends with the pig or with the sheep or the chickens. They would be her friends and her buddies as a little kid. And then in wintertime, she'd see her brothers go out there and slaughter one of them. So when she got to college, she kind of turned into a vegan, really. And so by the time I came around, we were vegetarian, really pescatarian, but mostly vegetarian at a time when it was not trendy. This is in the 80s, growing up in Oklahoma in cattle country. So I don't have cattle. Or any of those things. I grew up around it. So I grew up in a culture where I learned how to hunt, but I don't eat meat, right? but we do know how to use the land and those kind of things. So I'm now thinking about getting into, ruminants. So like maybe some sheep and goat, because I'm a fan of goat milk and things like that. But no.
Yeah.
Long answer to a short question, right? Yeah.
No, it's good. I mean, it all sets context, right? What was the dream when you were growing up? When you're little kind of.
So it's an interesting thing, and this will kind of really probably talk about like my perspective on Oklahoma. I mean, the dream. So my family, both sides, there are black towns sprinkled all throughout the state of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. So both parts of my family came from what are called like historically black towns, and those black towns popped up in Indian country because this was a place like during Reconstruction. So after the Civil War, or even as Native American tribes were being moved here, it was just a period of time when, like black people could come in a place and own land, like after the Civil War, like all those. So Oklahoma was like this place of opportunity and potential. Both of my families came there, and as time goes past, like you get drawn to the bigger cities and that kind of thing for more opportunity. So both my mom and my dad's family ended up in Oklahoma City for those reasons. And so I grew up in an Oklahoma City where it was kind of we felt a sense of ownership, but we also felt a sense of like a call to action, because Oklahoma City, like a lot of places, particularly in the South, and for today, Oklahoma City will be South. I'm sure you'll have people on who will vehemently like oppose that distinction and call it the Midwest. For today, it's going to be the South, because we kind of did slavery and Civil War with the South, right? So, but yeah, so it was always that place of opportunity, but also a place that had barriers and challenges, right? So I grew up, the dream was to do better than my grandparents. You know, I had both of my grandmothers started out cleaning, working as house maids or help in wealthier people's homes and things like that. Had a grandfather who was a bus driver, had a grandfather who was a bootlegger. So the goal was like to do better and be better. My paternal grandmother started one of the first federally qualified health centers with a group of other women, also out in the far eastern Oklahoma City called Mary Mahoney. And so I just grew up with that. Like, we're trying to leave this place better than we found it. So that was always the vision. Like, what are you going to do? My parents named me Sandino, which is not a typical African-American or Oklahoman name. But they did work in Central America when I was right before I was born and around the time I was born, just helping with a lot of humanitarian crisis, things like that. And they gave me a name of a person who was revered as a folk hero in Nicaragua. And the name sort of stuck. My mom was like, yeah, you were almost born there. Like, we weren't sure we were going to get back up here in time, but the name kind of stuck. And so it's just a sense of purpose we got to do something, leave a better impact than what we thought, because this was our place to build things. This is a place of opportunity. So
so you see this example, obviously, through your grandparents and history and family growing up, and obviously have this kind of deep root to help community in some way and be better. As you're going then through high school on to college, what's the thought? Do you have like any super interests that you're like, I'm going to go into this and this is going to be my lane, or did you figure that out later?
No, so that's a good question. Like, one, I guess I will always tell folks, and I was on my way over here, actually, we're talking about, I got a background in construction, but it actually came from me wanting to, I love Legos growing up. Same. And so that was a whole thing for me. But then my dad, and it's having to do with like just a lot of stereotypes that black men tend to get put into. It's like, what you're not going to do is aspire to be an athlete, right? It's not saying that won't happen or can't happen, but like, we're not starting from there. Like, that's like a lottery ticket, and we don't need lottery tickets. Like, we need to figure out like what you want to do, what you're going to be about. And so from an early age, it was like, think about the things that you actually want to do in life. And so when I was young, I'd tell people I wanted to be an architect, because I grew up watching the Brady Bunch. And I knew architects. I thought I knew architects built stuff. Found out afterwards they design things, they don't build things, but that's what I knew. I mean, so I tell people I wanted to be an architect, told people I wanted to be a scientist because I thought that was cute. It was just like whatever sort of struck my fancy. The older I got, the more I started thinking about like what I was really motivated by. But at a really young age, like, I mean, my parents were just good. I mean, you talked about me being comfortable in front of a microphone. I mean, I had a recording studio. One of my dad's best friends was our neighbor, and he had a reggae band and put a studio in his house. So I lived there in high school, you know. So for a time, my friends, even when I was in college, thought I was going to drop out and be a producer. They used to call me Puff, which is actually not such a great thing probably these days.
Right.
But they thought I was gonna be a producer. So anyway, all over the place.
Yeah.
All over the place. I didn't figure out what I really wanted to be until maybe I still haven't actually yet. Yeah.
Music sounds like a pretty big part of your life then.
Yeah.
Early on at least.
So it was early on. Just because I grew up in the golden age. I'm making controversial statements, I feel like. I grew up in what I felt like was the golden age of hip hop. So I can remember the first time hearing like Public Enemy, Run DMC, my favorite like Kool Moe Dee, some of those folks. So in this culture, like in the 80s and 90s, because I got a brother who's a little bit older than me, so I grew up in a lot of 80s culture, even though I didn't really come of age until the 90s. And so it gave me a lot of insights, but also it was the music piece, but it was technology. So I was in this studio where I had mixing boards and digital sort of aspects. So it's just exposure to wide-ranging things.
Yeah. You might not have thought of this yet, but this is just me putting two things together. You mentioned reggae, and also we've talked about community building. Mm-hmm. Bob Marley is that, right? Like,
yeah. No, so
like,
yes,
right?
you connected the dots because like that was actually the culture. My dad spent time in the military. He actually growing up, we heard he snuck in. I heard it wasn't actually that he snuck in. It was that, but he joined the military when he was 15, with my grandmother's consent, but not happiness. So he followed his older brother into the military. But what that did for him is expose him at a really young age. He was in Vietnam twice, but he spent time in Germany, the Mediterranean. It's all over the place. So when I was growing up, having parents who had been exposed to the world, like reggae music, thinking about culture. I grew up, my parents were, we had us writing pen pals with political prisoners in apartheid South Africa. Just all the things, fighting for. One of my earliest memories, the first time I was ever in the Oklahoman was marching to get January 15th acknowledged as a holiday for Martin Luther King. So just a lot of exposure. And so when you talk about Bob Marley, it kind of brought it home because I grew up with that sort of culture. It's just like this is just culture. So it was reggae culture, but it's also country boys, like understanding, having appreciation tied to the land, native connections, just wide ranging.
Yeah, just listening to you talk about your childhood, it's thanks to your parents. I'm sure you have a lot to be grateful for because of the way and the culture and that they traveled and having you do the pen pal thing. And you grew up with such a well-rounded, view or experience of the rest of the world. And I highly doubt that there's many people, probably 1 in 10 people have that, maybe. It's pretty awesome to shout out to your parents for giving you that too.
No, I'm thankful every day for sure, and I think it's an interesting thing because what it did for me, as I can reflect back, is it just allows me to appreciate a broader perspective, right? So again, like growing up in Oklahoma City and with that kind of childhood, I also, I got a chance to get to know folks in the Latino community, Hispanic community, friends of mine. Like a lot of folks, when I was a teenager, a lot of families from Juarez and places like that who had either first or second generation had come and settled in Oklahoma City. And it was because my dad was in community. Like, how do we sort of build up different places? We've got a large Southeast Asian population here. And I grew up like having Vietnamese friends. So it's like in Oklahoma, like, yes, like our Asian population is primarily like Vietnamese, Laotian, it's dominated by those cultures. And it was just a really interesting connection of people from all these different places who chose Oklahoma the way I felt like generations ago my family had chose Oklahoma. So that's the real takeaway for the way I was raised and came up, was just like in a place that people don't think about. We're not on the coast, not big cities and things like that. But I got the pleasure of having like just a lot of exposure to a lot of things, and that's before I went out and really got to see the world. The world kind of came to me.
Yeah. Where did you start traveling or make any trips before you went to college, or did you? I mean, what happens there?
I'm trying to think. First time I got on a plane was to Kansas City, so that's nothing really to speak of highly. I road tripped in college. And
that's also rare as an Oklahoman to not drive to Kansas City, because we love to drive places.
Well, this is back in the good old days when Southwest would actually get you there direct.
Like $25 or something.
Yeah, exactly. It was actually, I was high on the hog in those days. No, so I actually didn't travel internationally until I got out of college. What I did was, again, appreciate the way that Oklahoma could bring some of those things. So I went to school at OSU, so at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. And in part, that's where my mom went, so I kind of had that sort of connection. My dad went there for a little bit and then got kind of kicked out, escorted out for leading a walkout at the school, which is, again, another whole story. So I had this connection to OSU. And they had a really good architecture program when I thought I wanted to be an architect. Mm-hmm. Having had that upbringing that I had in Oklahoma City, I went to OSU, and it's probably the most quintessential college town I think we have in Oklahoma. I mean, a lot going on in Norman, a lot going on at OU, but it's a part of Oklahoma City. Stillwater's just far enough from Oklahoma City, just far enough from Tulsa, where you're not just driving home every time you feel like it or catching a ride. And so what you realize is you're actually in one of the most diverse places maybe in the state, because it's a town of 30 or 40,000 people. Half that population is there because of the university, and the university draws in a lot of diversity. So I built relationships with folks from almost every country in Africa. I've got friends, which is why I was asking you about your accent. I'm just always curious, because I got friends in different parts of Europe. One of my closest friends was from Kazakhstan. I have friends from South and Central America, and we had a lot of friends actually from Japan. We actually built a relationship with a whole group of folks, and that was all at OSU, all in the time I was there. So I feel like I traveled the world by appreciating that there was a world out there. And then when I graduated and got a job, I mean, that's when I started. That's when I started actually getting out in the world.
Yeah. Any favorite memories from college? Ones you're allowed to tell.
Yeah. Oof. Well, I don't know. I got a lot of favorite memories from college. Like, college was good for me. It was a good, I would do it all over again, like in a heartbeat. People say it's the best sort of years of your life, and I don't necessarily buy into that. Yeah, no, I don't know. I got to anchor the question. So, yeah, one of my favorite memories from college is we did a thing where we kind of bridged the gap with the African and the African American student population. So it's this weird thing where a lot of times we might have shared experience, especially in small towns, because people don't think about us differently. But we will culturally think about each other differently. And so I was in the black student government, and actually in student government at OSU, and we had the fortune of having some leaders who decided, like, we're going to bridge this gap and figure out that we got more in common than different, and we need to really just sort of understand that. So I developed a lot of good relationships there, and we would go to a lot of parties where we were just kind of exposing each other to a lot of different culture and a lot of different expectations. And I remember a carpool to Tulsa for a party once where we got pulled over, might have been exceeding the speed limit. And there were two cars of us. We got pulled over, and I was in a car with several of my friends. None of them were U.S. citizens. And so they were, how are we on profanity?
I mean, I can edit it out, but you're good.
So they were scared. I mean, I'm not gonna go rough in, but it was like,
I've been there.
Yeah, and so they were like, uh-oh, and it's dark. We're leaving this party, about to head back, and it's dark, and police sirens come on. We're on the highway, on the Broken Arrow Expressway, and I grew up being taught like these are the things you do around. I mean, in Black community, like we have what are considered the talk. Like here's how you deal with authority. Here's how you respond to it, and it's a lot about preservation, right? Like making sure you know your rights, you know how to talk to folks, but you also don't do things that will escalate a situation into some of the things we can probably read about in the news. So so I grew up with that. My godfather was a criminal defense lawyer and those kind of things. So the sirens come on and I slow down, but I didn't pull over because it was like probably 12 at night on a freeway with not a lot of good lighting, and they're freaking out. And they're like, do you see that car behind us? It's like, yeah, I slowed down. They're like, yeah, but you need to pull over. I was like, nah, bro. Like, there's 2 cars of us, and we got a car full of folks, and you guys are already freaking me out. What I'm not about to do is stop on the side of some dark road. And so we go on a little ride, and I slow down to make sure that the car's up to us, and the cops clearly getting annoyed because he's buzzing the sirens and all those kind of stuff. But I just keep going. I'm driving probably 30 miles on the side of the highway. We pull off into a very well-lit gas station. I turn around to my friends who have not had a lot of run-ins, and they're freaking out. They're about crying. They're like, we're going to lose our citizenship. Like, you're going to get us taken to jail. And I just turned to them and said, hey, shut up. Like, nobody in the car say anything. Like, period. Don't talk unless I tell you to talk. And they're like, huh? I'm just like, be quiet. Don't say anything. It's like, all right. And so I kind of had to try to put the fear of God in them. Of course, the police officer comes up, his partner comes around the other side, roll down the window. What's going on? Did you see my lights? And I'm like, yes, I did see the lights. Why didn't you stop? I slowed down so that slow down so you could acknowledge that I was here, blah, blah, blah. And pulled over. But like, I've got a car full of folks. Some of them are from here, some of them are from other places. And I didn't want to create a situation. And the cop he's upset. And I was like, I apologize because I know they make you feel good, but I feel like we're all in a safer spot, So very respectful. Give me your license, registration, start kind of asking questions about IDs. And I'm just like, look, some of my friends don't speak English, blah, blah, blah. Just let me know what you need, or if you got a question or concern, all well lit, cars are down, you can see what you need to see. Guys take my stuff, they go back to the car, and my buddies are freaking out. We're going to jail. My parents are gonna kill me. Cop comes back and says, next time you should probably stop, but I appreciate what you did. Here's a warning. Going about your business. Have a good night. And it was nuts because like the rest of the time that I knew these guys, whenever they got in trouble or had an issue, it's like, first thing they did was call me up, Sandino, what am I supposed to do? And it's just minor stuff, like anything, like, Sandino, what am I supposed to do? It's just like, you're supposed to know your rights, man. We all got them. So anyway, that's probably my favorite memory. Sorry, long diatribe. I can relate to that,
yeah. Like growing up probably the same way they did, or maybe differently, because I'm sure there might be guns. Police officers in African countries probably have guns, and worse. People who aren't police officers have a lot worse, probably, if you watch the news. I didn't have that, right? So when I came and I got pulled over, I was like, what do I do? Same thing. What do I do? I don't want to cause a scene, but also like, I don't want to get kicked out of this country because I like it here. We go through all those emotions. So I can't imagine how much they must have been.
Yeah, my parents created a monster because I feel like everybody's got rights. Like we all, I'm an Oklahoman through and through. Grew up in this country and those kind of things. But I believe that like if we really believe in our ideals and principles, like right, this country was built on immigration. I know those are like hot button topics, and I'm not like a fan of laissez-faire, anything goes. I'm also not a fan of like ignoring the fact that like it adds to the tapestry. So my thing is just, people should feel comfortable in this country if we want them to be here and they're contributing something. Yeah. So even in college, like that was the viewpoint. It's like, I'm here with folks who are engineers. My best friends are mechanical and chemical engineers, right? And like, these guys don't need to be walking around scared of their shadow, Like we should just be here because it's the land of the free. You know? So, yeah.
So you graduate with an architecture degree? Is that what
No, I graduated in construction management. Sorry. Let's get it back on track.
Yeah.
So I went to OSU thinking I wanted to be an architect because of the Brady Bunch, and I thought they built stuff. They took us on a tour that first semester to talk to architects. First, every architect said, "Don't do this for the money," and I was like, I didn't think I was, but the fact you keep telling me makes me think I might need to reconsider. Yeah. And then two, they talked about the process. And I mean, basically, to become a licensed architect, the process is very similar to what it takes to become a doctor. So you get the study, but then you have to go in and practice. And you have to sort of practice under people who know. And then you get to go out and test. So that was all like, okay, there's a little more to this than I thought. I don't just get a degree and like build crazy stuff. But then I realized that like this is all about drawing and designing stuff. And I'm I like to draw, but I'm not an artist. So there were a group of us that had this realization. We all switched into the construction management program, and they built it. I mean, that's kind of the deal. Like the construction management program is like, it's like if they had a moniker, it would be underneath it like we build stuff. Yeah. So I switched into that and never looked back.
Yeah. What year was that?
So graduated in 2002, but I started. I was there for 5 years, so I started in 97 and graduated 2002.
Yeah, good time.
Yeah, that was great.
And then you transitioned and get a job and start.
Yeah, so I took a whole week off and from school. So I had the privilege of working for the library. This is also a shout out to one librarians because I don't know if we appreciate them, but I got work study one semester while I was in college. My parents we started off, and I can remember this, like, I guess I'm a poster child for what it looks like to like have government support, because I remember like government support, food stamps and all those kind of things early on in my life. But as I got older, my parents did better and were able to. So by the time I got to college, like some years business would be great for my dad, it'd be good. Well, one year business was kind of down. And so entrepreneurs will kind of know like that doesn't necessarily mean your lifestyle changes, but like business was kind of down. So the family income dropped, and I got work study, got a job at the library, and I went to school year round because I was never going to give that job up. It was the best job I actually probably ever had in my life because I was in a library with librarians, and I was doing computer science, which was a hobby and a skill of mine. I was part of the IT department, and so I worked that job the whole time through. Worked year round, that kind of stuff. Got to research, got to learn so much. Anyway, that was crazy, but I just wasn't going to stop working because I love my job and I liked money. So I took a week off after I graduated, and then I went to go work for Manhattan Construction in Tulsa. So yeah, I've pretty much had some job someplace ever since. Yeah.
Do you know John Snyder?
I know John Snyder very well.
Yeah.
He is the person who hired me at Manhattan Construction. Yeah. So actually, Steve McDonald, who worked with the Rooneys, he kind of interviewed me. But when I came on board, John was the guy who my bosses worked for.
Small world. He's been on the show too, talking about the Mayo.
Yep, I stayed at the Mayo not too long ago when I was overnight in Tulsa and stayed up there, and it was funny because when I met John, he literally I would ride around with him sometimes when because it was a great experience. I got exposed to a lot of things, but it was when they were still kind of trying to figure out what to do, and so all these years later, I went back and kind of saw what it looked like and yeah, it's just interesting to see visions come to life, man.
It's a crazy story. Crazy story. Yeah. That's awesome. And so you moved to Tulsa then?
Yeah, so I lived in Tulsa for a little bit. I actually lived on the north side of Tulsa. I wanted to live, sort of be in community. I never wanted to act like I was from Tulsa, but I did want to be in community. That was important to me. And so bought my first house there, did some things there. Manhattan had the wisdom to send me to Fort Riley, Kansas, which is not close to Tulsa. It's close to the Little Apple of Manhattan, Kansas, which is where Kansas State University is, about 6 hours up the road, right after I had bought a house and after we had gotten a job that was around the corner from the house I bought. So that was rough for me. And so I kind of looked up and said, hey, if I might get shipped out, 6 hours away from home and be on sort of the road, in this business, like I get that that's how the business works, kind of want to do it on my own terms. And so I ended up going to work for a company that's based in Jacksonville, Florida. And they did work with the Department of Defense, think military bases. This was in the mid-2000s when we had a lot of hurricanes and things. So I worked throughout the Gulf Coast on on a lot of different military bases with that company after a couple of years at Manhattan Construction.
Yeah. During this time, then you're starting your career, you're moving around, traveling a little bit. You know, you're in a job that you sound like you really want to be in. What's the community building side of you doing this time?
Paying attention to what's happening in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home. So when I left Tulsa, I had what it really did was give me the opportunity to be in a lot of different places. So I'll sort of land this plane in a really sequential way. So I was in Tulsa for a while. That was good for me because it gave me exposure to another aspect of Oklahoma that I hadn't really seen firsthand. But then I left, and the first place I went to was Pensacola, Florida. Complete change for somebody from Oklahoma. Got to know like that part of Florida is considered LA, and I was like, huh? They were like, yeah, you're in Lower Alabama. Like, this isn't Miami. This ain't Disneyland. And I was like, okay, I get it. Well, I can be around. I know how to do country boys with the best of them. Ended up on flights with Emmitt Smith more than one time. Reminded me, oh yeah, he's from Pensacola. Cool. So anyway, but I was there when Hurricane Katrina came through New Orleans. So it was interesting to watch the federal response and the military response to that, because we saw it firsthand because I was down there after they had been impacted by hurricanes, building back some stuff on the Naval Air Station. Well, fast forward, we actually that company, we did some work in in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, rebuilding. We had work at one of the Naval Air Stations, so I got to see what that looked like. And it was everything you've heard about. You know, there's been enough time where people might forget about what it is like, but I don't know the last time a major American city has been like flooded, right? I mean, to the extent that like it reshapes, everything that's there and makes the place unlivable. Like we're not used, you see those kind of things in pictures, like in other places, but we don't see that like you'll see hurricane damage and that kind of stuff. Oh, Miami or whatever. But it was just wild to see the impact it had, creating migration patterns, but more importantly, what it looked like for people to come back or to not be able to come back in a city with so much culture. So after that work, my next post was in Key West, Florida. So yeah, I mean, sucks to be me. So 90 miles from Cuba. It's its own place because it's an island that we connected, a chain of islands that we connected one 2-lane road to. So you get island living, but you're not like in Hawaii or something. But it had been, again, devastated by hurricanes. We had kind of a good thing of being what they call third responders. And so I was coming into this community, and they had some of the smaller islands been completely flooded, and then the flood lines receded. So we had a contract to build back a couple of thousand units of housing. And this is sort of what lands the plane for like what got me back to Oklahoma. But I got to see what it looks like when you have the community. So these were the homes on the air station for servicemen and women and their families. So when that hurricane came through, there's a lot of military activity and stuff in Key West having to do with the Caribbean and everything else. So a lot of those servicemen and women had to stay because that's the job. But their families didn't have a place to stay, and you're on an island. So they had to send their families different places. So it's a big thing, like for the community to get this housing back online. So we came in as the company who was supposed to rehab the housing, bring it back online, a couple of thousand units. So this is like a massive project. We had 3 contracts at that time. So I got to watch when the community gets aligned. You have capital. In this case, it's the United States military saying, we've got to have places for our people to live. And then you had capability, so expertise. So company I worked for was good at this stuff. We had been doing it. We knew what it looked like. We knew the challenges of communities that have been impacted by disasters, right? And like in 18 months, we had the first block. We just kind of created a little assembly line. We had the first block coming online. And so I literally watched a community, a neighborhood that had been empty and desolate, looked like the living dead, like the whole zombie apocalypse, been empty. And I watched it just come back to life. Right. And so we go block by block. And so we got 2 or 3 blocks down the road, turn that stuff back over. And now you start seeing kids on bicycles and stuff like that. We're getting done at the end of the day. And you've got like servicemen and women stopping us and saying, hey, thank you guys. Like, I haven't been able to like spend time with my family. Like, I haven't had my kids we haven't all been together in like 2 years, right? 3 years. It was insane. So I saw that, and the whole time, because I'm a Oklahomie, I'm traveling back and forth to Oklahoma City, and this is about the time. This is around 2006, 2007. So Hurricane Katrina. Obviously, we got the Hornets. Like, I bought season tickets when the Hornets came here. I didn't even live here. I went in with my brother and bought season tickets because, like, we got a basketball team. We got to make this work. So I'm traveling back and forth, and I'm starting to see all the benefits of maps and the last 20 years. All these things I heard about were just starting out when I was younger. And I'm starting to see them sort of come along. And I'm seeing, like, my city transform as I'm coming back, every couple of months or whatever the case is. And then I'm sitting in Key West, and I'm thinking, like, we have these tools in Oklahoma City to do this kind of work. But I come back to Oklahoma City, and I'm on the east side or I'm on the far east side. I mean, we still got streets that aren't paved. We still got, schools that don't have like sidewalks to get to them and all this kind of stuff. All the things that we got, like what disinvestment looks like. And I'm just like, I know what that looks like to fix. I just saw it. So finished the job in Key West, had a stop in Tampa, had a stop in Houston, was working at Johnson Space Center in Houston, really fascinating project. But what it meant is that I got a direct flight from Houston to Oklahoma City. So, I had the fortune of the company I was working with. I was working basically 3/4s. And so 4 days in Oklahoma City, and then I'd work the middle part of the week. And then I'd get back first thing and work that project. It's like, as long as things are staying on point, then you can do that. So I was actually commuting to Houston functionally. And at that point, I just made up my mind. It's like, it's time for me to be back in Oklahoma City. I want to make sure that the East Side, I want to make sure African-American, the Black communities, but just the communities I grew up around. I mean, even my Hispanic and Asian like friends and stuff. I want to make sure that this city that I'm seeing emerge, like, it's a city for all of us. And so I moved back 2010, and it's just been all about, like, how do we see that vision to reality?
Yeah. So you come back in 2010, what's the first thing you get into? Like, how do you start? Because you're talking about making some big change and having to, like, there's a lot of things that have to happen, right?
Yeah, I went from hanging out with, like, literal rocket scientists, and, like, all the rocket science jokes immediately lost their value once you've been on a project like that. So I went from hanging out with the actual rocket scientists at Johnson Space Center to running a workforce development program. I had some relationships here. I came in and took a small charitable organization. So it was a charitable organization that some people that I had known and some friends of the family and stuff had operated, really to help, like, with some small things here and there, supporting, like, low-income families and that kind of thing. So I took over that charity and grew it into what we call a community-based organization. So it went from $40,000 to about $4 million by the time I left. And it was really based on, how do we think about federal government, state government, and other opportunities for social innovation and investment in community? I wanted to pair the community aspect, community building aspect, with the physical building aspect. So I knew how to build stuff. I had literally rebuilt neighborhoods. I had built advanced laboratory space. I had built office buildings. I built museums. So I knew how to build stuff, but I wanted to understand about, how do we build these pieces, this social infrastructure we need for a community. So I moved back. We had success in getting some grant funding from the Department of Labor, and we launched a workforce development program focused on getting low-income families, people who had criminal justice involved families, and others, wanted to get them involved in what were emerging jobs at the time. So it was wind industry, the recycling and logistics industry, and some things around electrical and electrification. So job training, placement, And that's where I started doing that work and investing in, buying, and building relationships in the real estate space.
Yeah. Before we get into that deeper, what are your hobbies at this point? Or are you just set on making change and making money? What do you do for fun to get out of like your headspace? Because it's not easy.
No, so it's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. This is probably not something that people should like. This is not something to replicate. I mean, my hobbies are just what I do. I think maybe I have the fortune to align those things, or the misfortune of just being sort of singular focused and no fun. I told you about the relationships I had built. So because I worked in construction and it's a cyclical thing, we didn't have time off. Like if you were sick, you stayed home, but you worked when we had jobs. But when we had downtime, I had actually gotten into a rhythm of traveling, and so I'd have the opportunity to go 2 or 3 weeks at a time sometimes, and I go visit friends of mine. Spent a lot of time in Southern Africa. Got to waste money on crazy business ideas. And the craziest thing I've invested in maybe so far is an alligator farm. And I tell people that
in Oklahoma.
No, it was in Manica Province, Mozambique.
Okay.
Yeah, which is it's a country twice the size of California, but it's it's on the east coast. It's what's across from Madagascar. Okay. Yeah, and so watching the videos of these guys almost get their hands bitten off from trying to harvest eggs from alligators was insane.
I mean, what's the purpose of having an alligator farm other than to make cowboy boots? And excuse me if that sounds terrible, but
no. So the hides
was that kind of what was the plan?
And the eggs, though.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are different markets, right? So you got to think when we're over there, it's like there's a whole world, right? Sure, yeah. So there are different markets, and there was a delicacy for both the eggs. I mean, to produce eggs, but also to be able to sell alligators. Yeah. You sell alligators and the hides. Yeah. So it was interesting. So that's what I did for fun was travel. Different places, keep that sort of broader perspective, and then try and bring that back to Oklahoma City. So.
Yeah. So clearly, you're very good at what you do. You're making an impact. You're taking, community center, like you said, from 40,000 to 4 million. People surely have to start noticing that you've moved back and you're making an impact. Do you start getting phone calls and stuff saying, like, how can we hire you? We need your help over here? Like, how do you transition into kind of what it is and the position that you're in now?
No, not phone calls. I mean, so what I want, and I hate this because I'm a storyteller, but we don't have all day. So,
I mean, I have as long as you have.
But it's not phone calls. What it is for me is a very interesting takeaway on the difference in having access. So, and talk about growing up in Oklahoma City, talk about growing up here. There are pluses and minuses, but like what you don't realize, I mean, people talk about glass ceilings a lot, and sometimes a glass ceiling is interesting because a ceiling, you know that it's there. A glass ceiling is like you don't know until you bump your head that thing even existed. And so what I will say is like recognizing how access or lack of access creates glass ceilings. So first of all, the first couple of things I did when I moved back were just they weren't failures. We failed because we had lack of access to capital, and I just didn't know any better. So invested in some things. We had some businesses people liked and did some things to build up the culture here, but ran out of money. And it wasn't even like the thing wasn't successful. It was that the economics didn't work. Our building got bought, rent got doubled, and all of a sudden we can't keep doing this thing that was really a passion project. So learn those lessons, but also it was access. I supported a city council person, is John Pettis at the time, is one of my peers. He's a couple years younger than me, and he was running to unseat the incumbent city council person, and he won. And we felt like it was time for something different, and he won. And so when he won, he facilitated conversations that our mayor at the time, Mick Cornett, he was receptive to about we've actually got to get better access. Like a lot of great things happening in the city. We got to do better. We got to get better access. So they kind of had an agreement just to work together to make sure that a more diverse group of people were aware of city boards and commissions. It's just something real simple and mundane. I got appointed to the Bricktown Urban Design Committee. which is one of these boards. And that board put me in touch with people who were doing developments that I could only dream of at the time. It put me in connection with real architects who were actually designing things and parts of the business community because we were sitting talking about developments in Bricktown at a time. We were going from I think at the time there was maybe there were 2 hotels in Bricktown, and now there are something like 12, something ridiculous, right? And so a lot of development. So it was that. That's actually what created the platform, is that I got access, and it wasn't just me. John Pettis and Mayor Cornett had said let's just identify people. So we started. There were other folks I had kind of known who also were now in the rooms, and so we started having conversations about how do we set the tone for doing something different on the East Side. A lot of conversations for my whole life. I mean, I grew up my grandmother's house, smack dab on the East Side, and we would walk down to the grocery store, and I didn't realize at the time, but every year you would see a little less and a little less stuff, and it was just the decline of 23rd Street, as I was walking there to the library. And so we started talking about what do we do about that? We've had all these false starts over the years, but we finally feel like we have community support and hopefully city support. Around this time, when Mayor Cornett was ending his time in office, and David Holt had run and won, and he kind of said if I win, this is something that he used the moniker One OKC, right? And said I want to sort of make sure that we got an OKC that's not just about the folks on the Northwest side and the North side, and so. We were able to build some momentum that basically said, let's start making investments on the East Side. So that's how it got going. I had access to build relationships, and then from those relationships, we were actually able to get people aligned on starting to start creating infrastructure opportunity.
Yeah, that's the hardest part, right? It's just getting in the door sometimes.
Absolutely.
Or talking to the right people to get in the door.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important. That's why I wanted to highlight that point, because a lot of times we think all we got to do is we'll just find smart folks. And there are smart folks in every community. Yeah, absolutely. We're not saying they're not intelligent folks. Or people just have to want it, right? Yeah, people just have to want to do something different. Well, I can assure you, I thought I wanted to be an architect my whole life growing up, because I didn't know what other engineers there were. So the desire won't get you there by itself. You have to have access, right? I didn't grow up around engineers, right? I didn't grow up around. I grew up around cowboys, and this not to my cowboy culture, because I love it and there's tons of value there. But I didn't grow up with these applied scientists. I grew up knowing how to take care of the land and be in self-reliance, right? So it's important just to understand the value of access, and that we have to, when we have it, we have to do things to make sure that people can come in, that we remove those barriers to access, right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
So you have this access now,
yep.
And you are now in charge of $15 million, is that right? How do we jump from there to there then?
At least. So I had a good run at working with some developers to do things that hadn't happened on the East Side. Mm-hmm. So the first commercial development in over 30 years on 23rd Street. It's modest. It's $10 million, and which is not a lot of money in the development world. A lot of money to me, right. Especially when I got to sign personal guarantees and I don't have $10 million worth of assets. But it's small in the commercial real estate world. But it was the largest development that had happened in my lifetime on the East Side. So. Was able to partner up with some developers who had some success and done really cool projects other parts of town. Had a lot of challenges that have been well documented. People can look up the East Point development on Northeast 23rd Street and see, we went to 25 banks before we get term sheets. And this is me with white developer friends who had done all the hipster things you can think of. They had redeveloped a brewery they had taken the Tower Theater and and redeveloped that music venue. They had done fancy apartments in Paseo and in the Plaza District and all these. They had cool restaurant operators, all that stuff. They come over on the East Side. We partner up to do East Point, and we got to go to 25 banks before we can get term sheet. right? And it's just that intractable history of redlining, history of, like systemic kind of inequality and disinvestment on the east side. So we just kind of realized from that this is not just about what we want to do. Like, we actually have to break down some barriers. And so it's not just about like having the ideas and having the opportunities, but like, if I couldn't do it with these guys, like, what's the chance that somebody first time out the door is going to be able to do something like this? And we need this kind of stuff to happen on the east side. So really started to focus on economic development, not just real estate development, not just building places. And when you start looking at that, it's like, we have to figure out a different approach. I got family from the Bay, so I spent time on the West Coast in San Francisco, and Silicon Valley is so crazy. I had cousins from San Francisco, and then one of my cousins grew up in San Jose. And when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was orange groves, right? And so they used to treat him like the little cousin from the country, because they were in San Francisco and he lived in San Jose. So it's always hard for me to think about Silicon Valley for what it is today. But so I've seen that culture, right? Yeah. And just for me, instinctively, I knew like Silicon Valley approach, like venture capital approach in itself wasn't going to solve the challenges on the east side. It wasn't going to solve the problem, not just the east side, but in the communities around the people who I knew. Mom first to graduate from college, so I went to college and graduated. We have a legacy. I mean, there are people who have legacies in Ivy School. I mean, I went to Oklahoma State University, right? So venture is full of folks who went to, Wharton School or Stanford, and MIT and all these kind of things, and these pedigrees. They were able, they have friends who are investment bankers or, or successful entrepreneurs. And people talk about like, oh, we're going to be the Silicon Valley of the plains or the Silicon Valley of the Midwest, right? And it was just like, that's not going to work for me in my community. So how do we do this a little bit differently? And so we knew we got to build jobs. We need more rooftops. We need more wealth in the community. But if we're going to see that happen, like, we got to build jobs and opportunity. And it's not that we don't have entrepreneurs. It's not that we don't have folks willing to take risk. And it's definitely not that we don't have some of the best and brightest in the neighborhood. But it's about access to information, access to networks, access to capital, just access to influence, right? And so this idea came out of, in Oklahoma City, during the pandemic, like, we kind of saw everything got exposed, right? So in Oklahoma City, I saw a statistic that the Alliance for Economic Development, it had somebody come and do a study and put together. Black population in Oklahoma City is about 13%. The number of Black-owned businesses is 2%. Right? So that's a huge, so we call that business parity, right? So it's a huge dislocation of business parity. How do you improve that, right? It was not going to be raising $50 million to go and invest in 20 companies, hoping that one of them will be worth $100 million or $200 million, right? That wasn't going to be the solution for us. But when I think about how we deal with getting that 2% closer to 13. We don't even have to get to 13 because, like, there are studies and there's economics that show, like, if we could get from 2%, if we could get halfway to parity, like to 6 or 7%, the impact on the entire city's economy is exponentially higher than just growing more businesses, because you've not only added more small businesses or medium-sized businesses, but you've taken out a disparity that was actually dragging down economic activity. So we looked at the lessons we had learned and the exposure to, like, doing real estate development on the east side, what was working with East Point. I got exposed to Echo, so Echo Investment Capital, who's run by Christian Kennedy. Like, we had a conversation. He came and hung out with me and some collaborators of ours during Juneteenth, which is about the blackest activity you can imagine in Oklahoma City, because it's the day that it's sort of like the Black Independence Day, right? Yeah. So it's the day that the last group of slaves in Texas were told that the Civil War was over, and this was after the end of the Civil War. But they had a military garrison that went to Galveston and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Like, Civil War is over. You guys are free." So, like, it's celebrated in African American culture, especially that connects to the South. Juneteenth, right? So he came and hung out with us. It's the first Juneteenth post pandemic. So we had a couple of hundred folks watching the finals. It was Kevin Durant against Giannis Antetokounmpo that year, and so we were kind of maybe rooting for Milwaukee. I mean, and he came and hung out with us and talked about his vision for Oklahoma City. We talked about our vision and started talking about these challenges in the economic development space. So really hashed out this approach to how do we deal with the 2 and 13? How do we deal with getting from 2% Black-owned businesses to something higher, and knowing that that's going to have a huge impact on the entire city's economy? So our impact fund, so we sort of sat with this idea, thought about how we could do things a little bit differently and maybe in more of an Oklahoma way than the way we saw people think about investments. So this is very much, and something that's always been important to us. A lot of times we try to fix these problems by doing charity, right? And charity has its place, like charitable giving, philanthropic donations. We've gotten a lot of support for the work we're doing in the community from people like Inasmuch Foundation, the Arnall Family Foundation, even JP Morgan Chase and some other foundations and philanthropic organizations have supported the work we're doing, and it has a place. It's actually invaluable. But if we're going to talk about like growth and inclusive growth and economic growth, we know it's got to be more than just getting donations. So looked at the model and said, what does it look like for us to build an investment approach that's not about replicating like venture capital? Like, capital tends to follow the least common denominator. Highest returns for the highest output. I'll make all the money I can, and then I'll start giving it back, Bill and Melinda Gates, right? I mean, even you start seeing some of the things that Bezos and some of these other folks, like, that's kind of been their format. Well, that's not going to work for Oklahoma City. It's definitely, I ain't got time to hope and pray for it to work for the East Side. So we looked at it and said, we need a different kind of fund, a fund that is focused on understanding the industry that exists in Oklahoma City, understanding Oklahoma City's superpowers. So we have like low cost of energy, low cost of real estate. We have a lot of untapped labor potential, right? So a lot of either underskilled labor, people who haven't had the opportunity to learn the skill sets that they need and sort of really are being or being not as productive as they could be. Or we've got this infrastructure for opportunities for wage growth that we're just not taking advantage of. So we looked at it and said, like, these are really simple sort of superpowers that we should lean into. We're in the middle of the country. We have this low-cost structure. We can build things in Oklahoma cheaper than they can build them on the West Coast or the East Coast. So we don't have to be the next Silicon Valley. But we can say to Silicon Valley, like, what kind of technology is being produced? What kind of ideas are people hashing that are really great ideas to solve the next generation of problems? How much of those things, instead of shipping the jobs outside of the country, can we actually onshore or like inshore come in, like inshore impact? So onshore in the country to inshore like impact within the country. And so we started thinking about like, yeah, what we could do is raise $50 million. It's thought to be a pilot, so we can identify businesses where that are Black, brown, woman-owned, just trying to improve that and trying to improve that 2 to 13, right? Understanding we have a lack of business parity. Identify those opportunities, either businesses that we can help to scale or business opportunities that we can recruit minority or more diverse management teams and founders into that can grow into these industries that are growing in Oklahoma. So we have aerospace that's huge industry in Oklahoma City. We have the life science industry, so a huge industry, a lot of growth. And then obviously we have energy. And so we're thinking about, the classical sort of energy economy that's been built in Oklahoma City, but then also thinking about all the things that are happening next in Oklahoma City in regards to energy. So focusing on those spaces and then thinking about like media and entertainment. We're here at Prairie Surf, like these kinds of opportunities. All of those have really huge, really large supply chains, and they have real great opportunities to start. You can start entry-level businesses that don't require you to be an Ivy League educated or a Wall Street sort of backed kind of operator, but you can work your way up the value chain to grow. Like in our estimation, we want to grow not just like the next Paycom, but we want to grow more Loves, which is a great local business that does all kinds of things, right? So that's the premise of the fund, and the idea is that we can actually build market rate returns. We can take advantage of real estate opportunities, the development opportunities in places like the East Side, but we can bring jobs and businesses along. We can scale businesses that will increase jobs, increase employment activity, increase wage activity alongside that.
Yeah.
So
I can see why you're fired up about it. Like it's going to make a huge impact, and obviously, in Oklahoma City, there is opportunity everywhere. Right?
Yeah.
But it's just like kind of what you've spoken about. It's finding that opportunity and taking advantage of it with the right people behind you that are actually going to make things work, right? And you're battling the stigma that you've already battled, But like I said, you have this, and we're working towards it with Echo. And yeah, what was the next? I mean, what does success look like in the next 10 years for you with this fund?
So my hope is, and I'm actually absolutely. I'm excited about sort of what we're learning so far. So my hope is that this will be a quick. I mean, the deployment time frame is like 2 years. We have a couple of ideas that we're already looking at. So the benefit of working with an Echo, and it's not. I don't want to say it's not just Echo, but the benefit of it being part of Echo's impact strategy is all of the deals and the investments that they're making. We get to sort of sit and look at those opportunities and think about, is there an impact business in here? So if I can identify those impact business opportunities, their network of other capital allocators or other partners, like we can talk to them about, hey, so what other opportunities are there to produce things, to build things, or take advantage of some of the sort of superpowers in Oklahoma? And we get a chance to that's like deal flow where we can build out business concepts and business models. So we will foundry some businesses, and we will invest in some businesses that can connect to things that are sort of going to grow. So my goal would be that we learn the lessons from this fund. It will be successful, right? But we'll learn kind of how to optimize the opportunities, what works the best. Like we'll learn those lessons, and we'll be able to actually show the folks who invest and maybe show people who are even skeptical. This is how it works. And now I think I've got a model that can be applied to other communities. There are a lot of cities in the country that are like Oklahoma City. So we want to do more here and show what that looks like to get that parity number going. But I also want to be able to look at other communities and sort of think about how this model might benefit other communities and their superpowers and their sort of unique set of interests and dynamics and challenges.
Yeah. How can people listening get involved, help out? I mean, add value. Like, is there anything that you need other than cash? Cash is always great.
Yeah. So that you said you did. We did not bury the lead. So one is dollars. So at the end of the day, when you're raising a fund, so we have initial early commitments on the dollar. So we're starting. but we're not finished. And some folks have even said like, it's sometimes a challenge to launch the fund. Sometimes you want to wait, but so much of this is about narrative, and it's about people understanding like what's happening in Oklahoma City. Like I really believed that like we needed folks to know that we're building some things for the kind of future that we're trying to create in Oklahoma City. So once we got the fund going, I didn't want to wait until, we raised $15 million to come back and say, oh, okay. So one thing is money. The other thing are connections and ideas. So our approach and the thesis is we're focused on Oklahoma City opportunities, like think Central Oklahoma. But, I'm an Oklahoman first, so I'm really trying to build industry and lean into the opportunities that we have in town, whether that is working with Native American tribes and their reservations, a lot of untapped potential to build industry there, whether it's, everything from Bartlesville and I don't think people know this, but Phillips 66 has like a research center up in Bartlesville to Burns Flat, which has like one of the longest runways in the country and is a certified spaceport. Like, so it's like one of the places they could land or could have landed the space shuttle or other types of projects, right? So thinking about ideas and how to connect them, that's a big thing for me, is like how we connect the ideas into the superpowers that exist here, and how do we create businesses that are building things, that are creating things in Oklahoma.
So if people listening do kind of, that strikes a chord with them, where do you send them? Do you have a website?
Yeah, so echo.global is just that's the easy way to get. So we have, you learn about Echo, the company, but we have a section on the website for the impact strategy there. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. It's just Sandino Thompson. I haven't run across any other Sandino Thompsons. I've run across some Sandinos, but not Sandino Thompsons. But on LinkedIn is another great way to connect. But yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, for people listening, I'll put the link to your LinkedIn and the website in the description, the show notes down below. You can go click that right now and check it out. And mate, appreciate you coming down. It's great to see the fire you have. Love that you've come back to Oklahoma and are doing great things. You haven't just decided to come back to raise a family like a lot of people do. You've come back to make a real impact. And,
it's a great place for those things. But Oklahoma City is a place for doers and creators, and that has always been the case since the place was founded. But I think it's more true now than at any point, because we do have a lot more resources, we have a lot more alignment, and we have a lot more visibility, right, in this country. Like whether it's Oklahoma City Thunder, whether it's like the growth and diversification of the economy, So that's that. You kind of nailed it. I know I kind of took your spiel a little bit, but this is a place for doers and creators. So I want people to know that, and I want to take advantage of it. Yeah.
Awesome. That's going to be a clip for Instagram. Thank you, mate. Appreciate you coming down. And for people listening, we'll catch you next episode. Cheers.
Appreciate it.